Tonight at 10, the Chancellor says he is totally focused on his plan for growth despite mounting pressure for another U-turn. Kwasi Kwarteng says his position on the mini-budget hasn't changed despite criticism of his plans and the financial turmoil.
My total focus, Faisal, is on delivering on the mini-budget and making sure that we get growth back into our economy. That's the central prize. That's the main focus.
And the Chancellor says he is not going anywhere. Also on the programme, the nurse accused of murdering 7 babies wrote a note saying, "I am evil, I did this," but her lawyers tell a court there is no proof. Donald Trump is ordered to give evidence to congressional investigators about the storming of the Capitol building in Washington last year. The Ukrainian refugees being housed in the UK as the government's 6-month scheme for the first arrivals ends. What now for those still here? And from Bing Crosby to Dame Margot Fontaine, the lost recordings of the BBC's Desert Island Discs discovered by a radio enthusiast.
And coming up on the BBC News Channel, gold for Great Britain at the Track Cycling World Championships, their first since 2018 as they beat Olympic champions Italy in the men's team pursuit.
Good evening. The Chancellor says he is totally focused on delivering his tax-cutting plans to increase economic growth, and he says he is not going anywhere. Kwasi Kwarteng admitted his mini-budget has caused some turbulence in the UK economy, but said countries around the world are facing similar problems. He was speaking amid growing pressure to abandon more of his economic plans, but despite repeated questions about U-turns, he said the government's position has not changed. As pressure intensifies on him and Liz Truss's premiership after just 37 days in the role, the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, said changing the Prime Minister would be a disastrously bad idea. Here's our political editor, Chris Mason.
Hiya.
The government finds itself in an almighty mess.
No, I mean, we've got 15 minutes.
I'm trying to find out what Conservative MPs say they should do.
Morning.
And what ministers say they will do. The Chancellor says he's sticking to his plan.
Our position hasn't changed. I will come up with the medium-term fiscal plan on the 31st of October, as I said earlier in the week, and there'll be more detail there.
The mood at Westminster is moving every hour.
What a rough old evening for Liz Truss last night.
Swirls of speculation and intrigue among ministers and backbenchers, with the most senior political figures asking the biggest question: can Liz Truss survive in the job?
The Prime Minister's been in office for 37 days, and this is the kind of chat you would normally associate with the end game.
A bit like among our family and friends, where we'll say some things in front of everyone but be more discreet about other stuff. The same goes for politicians. Things said in private don't have as much clout, but when hundreds are unhappy, it matters.
I want to read you just a handful of quotes from Conservative MPs in the last couple of hours. "It's checkmate, we're stuffed," said one. "It's dire," said another. "They've taken no responsibility whatsoever for hiking people's mortgage rates," and another with real anger. "We're all done for. And there's no question in my mind, this will all have to be junked. There'll be a U-turn."
This is about as loyal as backbenchers are sounding in public.
The messaging has been poor and the optics have been terrible. It's a new government. They've got time to put it right, as I've said, but not time to waste.
Conservative MPs agree on one thing, that this is a total mess, but they don't agree on anything else. Some have told me, look, you've got to bin all of those tax cuts, but then others say, yeah, but that's what Liz Truss stands for, and if we bin them, maybe she's finished. Some think that's a good idea, others less so. Others say, what about that help for energy bills for everyone? Maybe it has to be more focused, more targeted at the poor. But that is complicated. Some say sack the Chancellor, and others say that the Prime Minister has so spectacularly and so efficiently tanked that she has to go. But they can't agree on who'd replace her.
I think that changing the leadership would be a disastrously bad idea, not just politically but also economically. And we are absolutely going to stay focused on growing the economy.
This is a street that oozes two things: power and authority, or at least it usually does. The crux of all of this for Liz Truss is both of those things are ebbing away to her backbenchers, ebbing away to those volatile financial markets. She is in there trying to grapple them both back.
And the blunt truth is neither will return easily, and they may never do. Chris Mason, BBC News at Westminster.
Well, the Chancellor struck a defiant note today, saying he would 100% still be in his job in a month's time and he was going nowhere. He was speaking in Washington, where he's been attending a meeting at the International Monetary Fund. Our economics editor Faisal Islam is in Washington for us now. Faisal.
Sophie, from the moment this mini-budget was practically being delivered, the market reaction was terrible. What's new now is the political reaction, as we've been hearing, and the fact that the markets are now assuming that large swathes of the mini-budget is not going to happen. But that makes things quite precarious right now, because if the U-turn doesn't happen, or if it's smaller than expected, the risk is that the markets are underwhelmed and react accordingly. So when we heard from the Chancellor, who wanted to talk about the global origins of this interest rate and inflation crisis, his talks with Janet Yellen, the US Treasury Secretary, we also expected to hear some sense of a reversal coming. There was none. If a U-turn is being cooked up, it is not being done so by the actual Chancellor of the Exchequer.
All smiles for the Chancellor from his G7 colleagues. There is a lot going on in the world economy. Here's where they work it out, with the Germans, the IMF, all recorded by the official number 11 photographer, but unusually the UK itself has been on some of the agenda.
My total focus, Faisal, is on delivering on the mini-budget
In
making
full,
sure that we get growth back into our economy. That's the central prize. That's the main focus of my job. And the reason why I'm here in Washington, the reason you're here, is because we've got IMF annuals and everybody is talking about the same problems.
But behind closed doors at the G7, the BBC understands there was some diplomatic concern and surprise about how the UK has doubled down on unfunded tax cuts even after the market response.
Policy measures need to be well targeted and they need to be temporary. When monetary policy puts a foot on the brakes, fiscal policy should not step on the accelerator, because if it does, we are for a very dangerous ride.
The markets have been very volatile. Today, the rumours of a U-turn saw effective borrowing costs for government falling very sharply and sterling up, but then that was denied.
The letters IMF have a specific resonance in British economic history and for British chancellors. To be clear, this is not a moment like in 1976 where Britain had to ask for some sort of bailout, but it is historically extraordinary to have a chancellor come here meeting the world's finance ministers, selling his budget policies after they've been hammered by the markets, been met with some scepticism by international colleagues, and then, after having sold them, strong rumours back home in London of them being unpicked. His message today: there will be no U-turns. How long will that last?
The Chancellor did make one concession to thinking in the markets.
What I am going to acknowledge is the fact that it is a very dicey situation globally. That's what people are saying to me. The people are saying that
there's nothing specific going on with the UK.
Look, there was some turbulence. I'm frank enough to accept that.
Okay.
After the minute, but where I'm sitting here talking about the global challenges, everybody is focused on inflation. Everybody's affected by potential interest rate rises. Everybody's affected by the energy price spikes.
For the Chancellor, the mini-budget music is still playing. Many around the world are wondering for how much longer. Faisal Islam, BBC News at the IMF in Washington.
Well, let's talk to our political editor, Chris Mason, now in Westminster. So huge pressure on both the Chancellor and the Prime Minister. What happens now?
I think a U-turn, and a pretty big one, is
inevitable, and until that happens, another thing is inevitable, and that is a sense of inertia, nothing really being able to change. And that is because, and it's a direct consequence of, the collapsing authority of the Prime Minister. When you lose your authority as Prime Minister, you have to be propped up by the views of others, and those views are the views of her Conservative backbenchers. They are going in to see her. Her entire programme for government is on the table, and she has to try and work out which bits of it will fly with her party and the markets and the country, and which bits won't. And the status quo clearly is not an option. The other thing worth bearing in mind is, when does that U-turn come? Because as things stand, that economic statement from the Chancellor is meant to be 2 weeks on Monday. 2 weeks and a bit is a long time in politics, particularly right now. Can we wait that long? Can the markets wait that long? Can MPs wait that long? It doesn't look like it. And that brings us to an overall thought, which is that everything, not just in Liz Truss's programme for government, but her government itself, seems like it's on the table at the moment amongst her MPs. Some are talking about how they might remove her. Could they cobble together some alternative government without having to ask Conservative members to endorse it? That's how big a moment this is, and it's an astonishing one, because of course the Prime Minister has only been in office for a matter of weeks.
Chris Mason in Westminster, thank you. And there is plenty more on this, including updates and analysis from our editors and correspondents on BBC News Online. That's bbc.co.uk/news, or you can just use the BBC News app. The jury at the trial of the nurse accused of murdering 7 babies and attempting to murder another 10 has been shown notes found by police when they searched her house. On one, Lucy Letby had written, "I am evil, I did this," along with "I haven't done anything wrong." Her lawyers have told the court that she was a dedicated nurse who cared deeply about the babies she looked after, and they say there is no evidence that she harmed them. The 32-year-old denies all the charges. Judith Moritz reports.
Suspected of murdering the babies in her care, Lucy Letby wrote this note, which was found after her arrest. It was shown to the jury today. She scrawled, "I haven't done anything wrong," but also, "I'm a horrible, evil person. I killed them on purpose because I'm not good enough." And in capital letters, "I am evil. I did this." Her defence team accepts that she wrote it and say it's a note of anguish, not of guilt. The note was found when the nurse's house in Chester was searched by police. They also found other notes in which she protested her innocence. The prosecution case against Lucy Letby is that her malign hand was at work on the neonatal unit. But her defence team say she was a dedicated nurse who loved her job, trained hard, and didn't harm the children in her care. Outlining his case for the defence, Ben Myers KC told the jury that anybody who approaches this trial as a done deal has got it very, very wrong. He said that Lucy Letby faces a litany of allegations which are not proven. Using syringes to inject air into babies, no, he said. Tampering with bags of fluid, again, no. Physically assaulting children, poisoning them or smothering them, again, no. Lucy Letby listened from behind a glass partition. As Mr. Myers told the jury, "You won't get the answers simply by looking at that woman in the dock. This is how she is now, 6 years after starting to face allegations like this. And you can imagine that must be utterly gruelling for anyone." The court was told that Lucy Letby had built her life around the neonatal unit at the Countess of Chester Hospital and was often called in to cover shifts there at short notice. Her defence say that in several cases the hospital provided substandard care to babies, which she's being blamed for. Both sides have finished outlining their cases. Lucy Letby denies all the charges she faces. Her trial is expected to last for 6 months. Judith Moritz, BBC News, Manchester.
Donald Trump has been ordered to give evidence to the congressional panel investigating the storming of the US Capitol on January the 6th last year. 5 people were killed and hundreds, including many law enforcement officers, were injured. Tonight, the committee said the former president is required to answer for his actions. Our North America editor, Sarah Smith, reports.
As a violent mob stormed the Capitol, trying to stop Congress from confirming Joe Biden as president, elected members were rushed to safety. shown here on this previously unseen footage.
More information. They're putting on their tear gas masks.
I can't. At the same time, according to witnesses, Donald Trump was watching the violence on TV from inside the White House and refusing to tell his supporters to back down.
They said somebody was shot. It was just horrendous, and all at the instigation of the President of the United States.
The committee has heard how the violence inside the Capitol was inflamed by a Trump tweet accusing his own Vice President Mike Pence of cowardice for not helping him to overturn the election.
The impact of that tweet was foreseeable and predictable. It further inflamed the mob, which was chanting, "Hang Mike Pence," and provoked them to even greater violence.
The Vice President only just escaped the mob and then worked with Democrats to get Congress reconvened.
Bring the president's message.
The committee say Donald Trump demonstrated he did have control over this violent crowd when he eventually told his supporters to go home.
He says go home. He says go home.
After months of investigation, this committee believes it has shown that what happened on January the 6th was deliberately orchestrated by Donald Trump himself as he tried illegally to cling on to power.
We are obligated to seek answers directly from the man who set this all in motion. And every American is entitled to those answers, so we can act now to protect our republic.
So in a dramatic twist, the committee have voted to subpoena Donald Trump himself.
Now, Donald Trump has already taken to social media, of course, where he's wondering why the committee didn't ask him to testify months ago. He didn't say how he'll respond to the subpoena. He may well try to fight it in court, but that's not easy. His former aide, Steve Bannon, ignored a subpoena from the same committee. He's been found guilty of being in contempt of Congress, and he's currently awaiting sentencing for that crime.
Sarah Smith, thank you. 7 million people were waiting for hospital treatment in England in August. That's an all-time record. Nearly 390,000 patients have been waiting for more than a year for planned treatment, but NHS England says the number waiting for more than 18 months has fallen. Last month, almost 33,000 patients waited more than 12 hours in A&E for a bed, another record. And 29% of patients had to wait longer than 4 hours to be seen in A&E. It's a similar story across the UK. In fact, the figures for the other nations were higher. Our health editor Hugh Pym has spent the day at University Hospital Coventry to see how staff are coping in the face of mounting pressure.
So my colleagues over here will call you over and we'll get booked in.
Sharon has one of the key jobs at the hospital, at the front door of the emergency department. With some patients walking in and others arriving by ambulance, it's her job to try and manage who goes where.
I'm sometimes called the door dragon. It can be soul destroying, it really can. We want the patients to be seen as quickly as possible. We can see on the screen how many ambulances are en route. I know how many spaces there are in the department, and it can be really difficult.
It's a typical Monday, it's busy.
The less serious cases are sent straight to the minors unit.
I was probably here for about 20 minutes before I was initially seen by the nurse, and just waiting now for x-ray. So.
Daniel Riggs.
Danny was injured on his stag do last night.
We'll x-ray your hand, we'll x-ray your wrist.
The x-ray showed no fracture, but with the wedding days away, the bruising may linger. The aim, where possible, is to keep patients away from the main emergency department.
We're doing an awful lot of work, turning patients around as quickly as possible and not admitting them, so providing better care in the community for them, so redirecting them to those other provisions outside of the hospital walls.
We're looking after you in the safest possible place, OK?
But those like Brian, who've arrived by ambulance, need more tests. He collapsed in the night at home.
If we're unable to safely look after you at home, we'll come and talk to you about what that means.
Yes, I don't want to go into one of these homes.
The hope is that Brian won't need admitting today, with pressure on beds mounting.
Everyone with a green arrow is ready to move to a ward. And the reason that they've not been able to move into a ward is because that bed is currently filled with another patient. Despite addressing every single thing that we possibly can, we are still not able to generate capacity in the system to get patients off the back of ambulances.
So we've got patients here waiting hours and hours for beds.
Is it possible for us to film with a patient moving from here to the ward?
I'm afraid at the moment that's not possible. We don't have any space within the hospital to move anybody.
Ward 42 discharged, 3 allocated.
Minute by minute, these screens show how the department is coping. 3 ambulances, in red here, are being held with patients on board. Here we can join a meeting with local social care and community health teams coming into the hospital to discuss transferring patients back home.
Following assessment, the patient can go home, but the family don't want him to go home.
For a ward bed to be cleared, a patient needs to have social care in place or family members willing to take on their care.
The daughter is not supporting with that.
Decisions at this meeting on moving patients out when safe are vital. As more ambulances with more patients arrive, Esme, a senior paramedic, is at the front door helping the flow. So it's early afternoon. How do you see it developing later in the day?
Well, I already know that we're going to be holding more ambulances later. We've been told that there's very little discharge within the hospital today. At the moment, we've got 2 holding outside. That's a good day.
And what's a bad day?
We can have up to 20 ambulances holding outside.
It's only October. With flu and COVID coming, more difficult months are expected.
I think this winter's going to be dreadful. I think it's going to be really hard for patients. I think it's going to be really hard for staff.
And this is a hospital which invited us in to show the measures they're taking to ease the pressure. But even here, it's a formidable task. Hugh Pym, BBC News, Coventry.
Since the start of the war in Ukraine, almost 100,000 Ukrainian refugees have come to the UK under the Homes for Ukraine scheme. They can come here if they're sponsored by a household who get £350 a month from the government for up to 6 months. Nearly 30,000 Ukrainians have been here for that time, according to analysis by BBC News. And now they and their host families are having to make difficult decisions about the future. The government says they have a number of options, like renting privately or finding a new sponsor. And they say councils have a duty to ensure they have somewhere to go. Our special correspondent Lucy Manning reports.
That's her. That's her, isn't it?
Yeah. March, Stansted, safety.
Hello.
Claire and her family sponsored Elena and her daughter Diana from Irpin. They couldn't let go of each other.
Oh my God. Tired. Okay.
But after 6 months in Essex, it is time to go.
That's fine, just put it on the...
But to where?
So what are you going to do?
I've got no idea. I won't be kicking them out tomorrow because, you know, that would just be completely unreasonable. The government were very much, people of UK, open your doors, we'll be supportive of you. And they haven't been. My hosting commitment of 6 months is over.
Calls to the council and local MP have brought no viable solutions.
Well, just let down. As I say, it's caused me enormous amount of stress because I don't want to see my guests homeless. By the same token, for personal reasons, I do need to see an end to them living with us.
22-year-old Diana first stayed with Claire as a child when she came with the Chernobyl Children's Charity. The return here, forced by war, hasn't been easy. Host and guests are pleased the sponsorship happened, but there have been strains.
Is it stressful for you to know that you have to move?
Yes, it's stress for me because I understand I live here, so my time finish, and I understand Claire because home little.
Elena now has a job, so wants to stay in the area, but worries rent will be too expensive.
Across the country, families opened up their homes to Ukrainians, but by the end of this month, nearly 30,000 will have been here for 6 months, and that number will only rise.
In Oxfordshire, Anna, a mathematician from Donetsk, and her 2 children have been sponsored by Jane and her husband Nick.
Can I take a glass?
Getting on well, but next month will be the end of the sponsorship period.
I think we feel guilty because it's hard to end a commitment. If it was recognised at the beginning, we are just refuge. We are not here to provide accommodation for as long as the war goes on for. I think more thinking along those lines would have been helpful. both for our thinking and the government.
They are trying to find new sponsors nearby so the children can stay in their schools.
I'm worried that if we don't find accommodation, I'll be forced to impose change on my children again. There is a difficult journey ahead of them. They don't have roots, and another change would be a blow for them.
The war isn't over, so neither is their exile. Lucy Manning, BBC News.
The BBC has ruled that the Match of the Day presenter Gary Lineker broke the corporation's impartiality rules in February in a tweet about the Conservative Party. Reacting to a story about Liz Truss, then Foreign Secretary, who was urging a boycott of the Champions League final in Russia, Gary Lineker questioned if the Conservatives would hand back their donations from Russian donors if there was one. The BBC said although Mr Lineker didn't have to meet the same standards of impartiality as its journalists, his high profile meant he had additional responsibility. The leader of China, Xi Jinping, is set to be given a historic third term in power this weekend, and the effort to boost his image and popularity is in full swing across the country. State media has headline stories about how poorer towns have transformed after visits from the president. Our correspondent Stephen McDonnell reports from one such area, Hebei province, in the heart of rural China.
Zhengbei is on show to Chinese people as a model of poverty alleviation, an area transformed after a visit from Xi Jinping. We see pictures of China's leader now hanging in people's homes.
We all shook his hand. It was very warm.
Stories of Xi Jinping's miraculous advice to poor farmers are being retold on TV, like his 2017 trip to Zhengbei.
How about mini potatoes for a better price?
These are the potatoes which Xi Jinping is said to have suggested they switch to, and which are said to have brought such prosperity to the area. Who knows whose idea it really was? It doesn't matter, because Xi's role in this has now become part of Communist Party folklore. And just in case the potatoes aren't enough, the government is making sure of it with village renovations.
The government has built irrigation infrastructure and roads.
But has life improved for everyone?
It's the same. Same.
Under Xi Jinping, the Chinese government has declared an official end to extreme poverty. Perhaps it all comes down to a definition of what constitutes extreme. Certainly, though, if you visit rural areas in China, you'll find people whose living standards are well short of those in the city. This woman says in her village, their income is from a type of wheat and potatoes. But this year there was a bad drought all summer, meaning no wheat sales and not even enough for them to use. She's proud of her twin boys now at university and has borrowed from relatives and done manual labour to pay for their tuition.
I hardly buy anything for myself and try my best to save. I have to be strong, or they won't make it.
Xi Jinping has said that eliminating poverty is a key priority. There have clearly been improvements in this area, but you also don't have to look hard to find those still doing it tough. Stephen McDonnell, BBC News, Zhengbei.
More than 90 missing episodes of the BBC's long-running radio show Desert Island Discs from the 1960s and 70s have been discovered in a box of old reels. The interviews with a host of famous stars, from Bing Crosby to Dame Margot Fonteyn, are amateur recordings made by listeners at a time when programmes weren't automatically saved for the BBC's archive. Here are some of the lost recordings.
All the scenery, the costumes, music and everything were left behind in Holland when the Germans invaded that country, and we left rather hurriedly and in an improvised manner in what we were wearing and what we could wear on top of our ordinary clothes.
I started writing when I was about 12 or 13, I think. I wrote some splendid plays, now I come to think of it. I've rather forgotten them. They were all very, very short.
And one luxury to take with you to the island?
That'll have to be a piano, although I don't know how it's going to stand up to the hurricanes and so forth.
It will be an upright piano, of course. So with an upright piano, we'll let you have a cover.
And perhaps a tuning key?
And a tuning key.
Oh, good.
You were nicknamed Bing after a character in a comic strip.
Mm-hmm. Oh, there was this comic strip called the Bingville Bugle. And the leading character was sort of a tramp. Wore a tin can on his head.
There was something about the ears, I gathered.
And his ears looked something like mine do now. They were rather prominent, looked like a taxi with both doors open.
How about that? Desert Island Discs lost and now found. Louise Lear is here with the weather. Hello.
Hello then. Well, it looks likely that we're going to see some cloud around today, but it was a beautiful sunset this evening in East Yorkshire, wasn't it? Sunshine certainly at a premium, I suspect, as we go into tomorrow because of the amount of cloud that's spilling in as we speak. Some down to the southwest, as you can see, but it's actually this curl of cloud here that will bring the heaviest of the overnight rain across northwest Scotland and Northern Ireland. It weakens off as it pushes its way south and east, and further south of that, it's a drab affair, a lot of low cloud, it's drizzly, it's murky, it's foggy, perhaps some persistent rain pushing into the far southwest by the end of the night. But at least that cloud keeps those temperatures up. So a mild start to Friday morning, but a very murky one. There could be some fog around as well. And it stays overcast and drizzly for much of the day, with some of that rain just sitting and hanging around across the south coast. There will be some sunshine, North Wales, northern England. Eventually that frontal system out of Scotland will push its way steadily south. And for Scotland and Northern Ireland, it's sunshine and blustery showers. What a mess, I hear you cry. I quite agree. In terms of the feel of things, 12 to 18 degrees. Now we keep the mess, unfortunately, into the weekend. Look at this. Low pressure never too far away. We're all going to see some rain or showers at some time this weekend, and it is going to be windy with it. Early morning rain to clear its way northwards through Scotland, and then blustery showers circulating around that low. At least the winds are pretty strong, so the showers will push through at quite a pace, but they'll be very hit and miss throughout the afternoon. Widely those gusts of winds 30, perhaps 30 miles an hour, 35 miles an hour stronger. But in terms of the feel of things, well, we're going to keep a fresher feel in Scotland, 10 to 13 degrees, highs of 18 in the far southeast. Sophie.
Louise, thank you very much. And that's it from us on the BBC News at 10. Newsnight with Victoria Derbyshire is just getting underway on BBC Two. Now it's time to join our teams across the nations and regions for the news where you are. Good night.